I've just been reading in a really nice book called The Craft of Thought about Augustine's understanding of vision. And from what I gather, he's basing his ideas of vision on interpretations of Scripture, largely Genesis and elsewhere. But what I find interesting about it is it doesn't come across simply as a sort of scriptural exegesis. It's more like, well, it's a sort of phenomenological account, really, I think, of the relationship between corporeal seeing, actual physical use of the eyes, and certain metaphorical understandings. At least that's how I'm interpreting it from my perspective. He says there are three types of vision. One he calls corporeal vision, which is the fully embodied action of, well, I would now understood as light entering the eyes and being distributed to various parts of the visual system. He wouldn't put it in those terms, of course, but the action of the senses and the relationship between the senses and the physical world. Corporeal seeing, he says. And he distinguishes that from what he calls spiritual seeing, which I was quite surprised by. I thought he would be talking in religious terms about spiritual seeing, and it sort of is. But it's more the sense that that spiritual seeing is the sort of seeing that takes place in the memory and the imagination. That's sort of how he talks about it. The fact that I can look out over this horizon here, I can close my eyes, and apart from the after image that I'm getting, I can also see that again in my imagination or my memory. In fact, as far as I understand, Augustine said that we don't really see something at all until we turn away from it, he says, which I think is lovely. I'm looking at this tree now, and in the theories that I've been reading elsewhere, things like Zellman's theory and so on about inactive vision and reflective monism, those sort of ideas. The way I've been interpreting that is that my seeing takes place at the level of the tree, but for Augustine, I don't really see the tree until I turn away from the tree, and then the tree appears fully formed in spiritual terms in my memory or imagination. Edelman would say that's not the case, that my seeing of the tree is a form of memory, it's the remembered present. But I think Augustine's spin on that is particularly interesting. So we have those two ideas of vision, the corporeal seeing and spiritual seeing. The third sort of seeing, which he associates mostly with theology and with the aspirations to see God, is what he called intellectual. I didn't call it. He's writing in Latin, but it's translated as intellectual seeing. I think he called it theoria, which is a great term. It's intellectual seeing, in which well, I haven't completely got my hand around this yet, but it seems to be about, well, the way I'm interpreting it is it's the sort of metaphorical seeing of patterns and greater wholes, and the seeing of abstractions, and the seeing and intellectual understanding of schemes of knowledge rather than individual knowledge items. I'm trying to think of an example. Well, all these trees around, many regions, these are oak trees that I'm looking at on the horizon here. I have a sort of intellectual vision. Well, I have a corporeal vision of the tree. When I close my eyes, I have a spiritual image of the tree appearing in my memory and imagination. But I also have, in Augustinian terms, an intellectual understanding of that tree in terms of, for example, its relationship to its environment. I have a sort of picture of an ecology in my mind that the tree appears within, or I have an evolutionary history of that tree, perhaps, or I might have, I don't, but I might have, or I might have an image, a theory possibly, about how that tree has emerged in relation to the sort of hylomorphic processes by which it transformed from an acorn, let's say, or in more contemporary terms, the genetic and ecological processes which enact that change. So I'm not saying God, but is a sort of intellectual engagement which to Augustine is simply another form of seeing. So I think we can certainly see that within that there is a blending or a continuum across the metaphorical and the literal uses of the term seeing. In some cases they're overlaid or very closely allied together, so I see a tree, I turn away, I see the tree in a different way. And it also embraces this sort of theoria, this theoretical, this intellectual understanding of seeing. One of the things that comes out of that in the language, at least, he doesn't make overt reference to it, but it's very, very clearly outlaid in the language, is metaphors to do with height and to do with substance. When he's talking about corporeal seeing, all the metaphors are to do with ground level vision, the experience that I'm having right now, walking along the earth and looking out across its surface. And that earth is solid, and the things that I'm looking at are solid. The objects which appear in that vision, if you like, appear to be solid. And there's also a clear distinction between myself and the object. I am an object amongst other objects, and it's a sort of clearly defined, hard, substantive environment down here at ground level. When he talks about the spiritual, and particularly when he talks about the intellectual, there's a sense in which that those are ascending layers, a little bit like Kierkegaard talks about actually in terms of his understanding of the aesthetic and the ethical. But there's a set of ascendant possibilities there. So the spiritual he sort of imagines as slightly higher, and also slightly more evanescent or transcendent or fluid or vaporous almost, in which there's not the objects that exist, the memory of the tree and the imagination of the tree. They're not quite such solid objects. They have a more multivalent nature. They're more motile, more ductile. And intellectual seeing in Augustine is even more elevated. You would see that as being transcendent and ultimately aspirational to God, who is most definitely not of the sublunary. It's a highly elevated position that one gains if one adopts this method of theoria. It's an ascendant position, presumably a convergent position, if Teilhard de Chardin didn't want to go by. And the substance of that elevated position is airy and ethereal and distributed. And within that there's essentially no separation between the object and the subject. There is no hard object separated in space from this other hard subject. There is singularity in the vapor, and there is a radiant light is implied in that. It's a really interesting system and complex, but at the same time quite intuitive. How it pans out intellectually, I've yet to figure out.